Welcome, dear listener, to another journey back in time where the shadows of history offer us both wisdom and respite. Tonight, as the modern world continues its relentless pace around you, I invite you to settle into a comfortable position and allow your mind to wander with me through the corridors of medieval life. Specifically, the often overlooked experiences of women who lived, loved, and endured during these challenging times. Their stories, though distant, speak to the resilience of the human spirit in ways that might help soothe your thoughts as you prepare for rest. This historical journey is designed to help you unwind, to create a space where learning and relaxation intertwine as you drift toward peaceful slumber. The steady rhythm of history has a way of putting our own challenges into perspective, offering a unique form of comfort as we connect with those who came before us. I'm always curious, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Is it the quiet hours of early morning, the gentle afternoon, or perhaps the deep stillness of midnight? Leave a comment sharing your location and the time of day. I find such joy in seeing how our community gathers across different time zones, united by our appreciation for these moments of historical reflection. If these journeys into the past bring you comfort, consider subscribing so you won't miss future explorations of history's quieter corners. Each story is crafted to provide that perfect blend of fascinating detail and soothing narrative that helps ease the transition into restful sleep. Now, let us leave behind the bright screens and urgent notifications of our modern existence. Close your eyes if you wish, and allow yourself to be transported to a world of thatched roofs, stone castles, and the forgotten women whose hands shaped medieval life in ways both small and profound. The rooster had not yet announced the day when Marjorie's eyes opened to the familiar darkness of her small cottage. Beside her, her husband Thomas continued his deep, rhythmic breathing, while their two older children slumbered on straw pallets nearby. Always the first to rise, last to rest, her mother had told her on her wedding day 6 years ago, words that had proven to be the unalterable truth of a peasant woman's existence. Carefully extracting herself from the shared bedding, Marjorie felt the familiar ache in her lower back, a constant companion since the birth of her third child, just 4 months prior. "Hush now, little one," she whispered as she lifted the swaddled infant from his wooden cradle, the child having stirred at his mother's movement. She settled onto a small stool near the cold hearth, unlacing her simple linen shift to nurse him while her free hand reached for the tinderbox. This was the art all peasant women mastered, doing 2 tasks, often 3, with only 2 hands. The baby suckled contentedly as Marjorie coaxed the previous night's embers back to life, adding small twigs and then larger pieces of precious firewood that Thomas had collected from the Lord's forest, carefully staying within their allotted rights. By the time the cottage began to warm and the first gray light filtered through the single small window, Marjorie had already mixed the coarse barley flour with water, forming the day's bread that would bake in the communal village oven later that morning. The baby, now fed and re-swaddled, lay in his cradle as she moved through her morning tasks with practiced efficiency, hanging the iron pot of pottage over the fire to simmer throughout the day, straining the previous day's ale, and sweeping the packed earth floor with a crude broom of bound twigs. "Mother," came a small voice as her daughter Agnes, not yet 5, rubbed sleep from her eyes. "Come help me stir the pottage while I milk the goat," Marjorie said, already reaching for the wooden pail. Every moment of daylight was precious, every task interconnected with the next in an endless chain that bound her from dawn until well after dusk. Miles away in a stone manor house, Lady Eleanor awoke to a different kind of bondage. As her lady's maid drew back the bed curtains and helped her rise, Eleanor's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach, wondering if this month would finally bring the news her husband's family so desperately awaited. 3 years married at the age of 17, and still no child to secure the alliance between her father's lands and her husband's estate. "Your monthly courses, my lady?" the maid asked quietly as she helped Eleanor into her linen chemise. "Not yet, but it's early still," Eleanor replied, her voice betraying neither hope nor fear, though both churned within her. The elaborate ritual of dressing began: chemise, kirtle, surcoat, and finally the veiled headdress that proclaimed her married status to the world. "Lord William requests your presence at breakfast this morning," the maid informed her as she fastened Eleanor's belt, with its decorative keys that symbolized her authority over the household, an authority that was, in truth, severely circumscribed by her mother-in-law's continued presence. "His cousin arrives from London today." Eleanor nodded, her face a practiced mask of pleasant acquiescence. She had been purchased with her father's silver and lands as surely as the new tapestries that hung in the great hall. Her education in music, languages, and household management made her valuable, but it was her family's wealth and her womb that truly determined her worth. As she descended the stone staircase to break her fast with a husband who increasingly looked upon her with disappointment, Eleanor mentally reviewed the household accounts and meal plans. The small domain where she could exercise some measure of control. In a humble cottage at the edge of the village, old Agnes the midwife ground herbs with a mortar and pestle, her gnarled hands moving with surprising strength. At 60 winters, she had survived longer than most, outliving 2 husbands and bearing 5 children, 3 of whom still lived. It was not her family that gave her position in the village, however, but her knowledge, passed down from her grandmother and mother before her, of the plants that eased pain, stanched bleeding, or brought on delayed monthly courses when necessary. Careful with the amounts, she murmured to her apprentice, a quiet widow named Joan. "Too little tansy does nothing. Too much brings danger." The bundle they prepared today was for the miller's young wife, now in her second day of difficult labor with her first child. "They're saying Father Thomas saw you gathering herbs near the cemetery at dusk," Joan said quietly, her eyes not meeting the older woman's. Agnes made a dismissive sound in her throat. "The best feverfew grows there, and I'll not let idle talk keep a mother from what might save her life." But both women knew the precarious line Agnes walked. The same knowledge that made her indispensable to the women of the village could, with one whispered accusation, transform her into a witch in the eyes of authorities. Already the new priest looked askance at her remedies, preferring to recommend prayer alone for women's difficulties. "We must go now," Agnes said, wrapping her herbs in clean linen. "Young Emma has waited long enough, and first babies are often the hardest." As they walked through the village, women nodded respectfully to Agnes, while men carefully avoided her gaze. The eternal contradiction of the midwife's existence, both essential and suspect, respected and feared. The small cottage was stifling in the summer heat. The single window shuddered against evil humors that might enter during childbirth. Martha lay on the straw-filled mattress, her face contorted in pain as another contraction seized her young body. At 19, she was already in her 3rd labor, her swollen belly rising like a mountain beneath the sweat-soaked shift. Agnes moved with practiced efficiency around the birthing chamber, laying out clean linens and checking her supplies of ergot and pennyroyal, while Joan stoked the fire despite the oppressive warmth. "The pains are coming faster now," Agnes observed, placing a weathered hand on Martha's forehead. "You're doing well, child. Remember to breathe as I showed you." Martha nodded weakly, her eyes wide with the fear that every woman in the room recognized, but none would name. Her first birth had been difficult, but successful, a strong son who now toddled around their cottage. Her second had nearly killed her, the baby born blue and still, buried beneath the oak tree without even a name. This 3rd pregnancy had weakened her considerably. and the whispers among the village women suggested that Martha's narrow hips might not allow for an easy delivery. "Holy Mother, blessed among women, look upon your daughter in her hour of need," murmured Goodwife Ellen from the corner, where 3 neighboring women had gathered to assist and bear witness. Their prayers formed a constant undercurrent to Martha's increasingly urgent moans. "Saint Margaret, protector of women in childbirth, intercede for her." Agnes exchanged a knowing glance with Joan. Prayers were well and good, but it would be their knowledge and Martha's strength that would determine the outcome today. As the sun climbed higher, Martha's labor intensified. "I feel the need to push," she gasped between contractions that now came relentlessly. Agnes positioned herself at the foot of the bed, her experienced hands ready. "When the pain comes again, bear down with all your might," she instructed, her voice calm despite the tension evident in the room. Martha screamed as she pushed, her young face aged by suffering, her knuckles white as she gripped the rope hung from the ceiling beam for this purpose. The women around her murmured encouragement, dabbing her forehead with damp cloths and supporting her back. Hours passed in this rhythm of pain and effort, until finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, Agnes announced, "I can see the head. One more strong push, Martha." With a guttural cry that seemed to come from some primal place beyond conscious thought, Martha gave a final desperate push. Agnes's skilled hands guided the slippery infant into the world, quickly clearing its mouth and nose. For one terrible moment, silence hung in the room. Then came the blessed sound of a newborn's indignant wail. "A daughter," Agnes announced, wrapping the tiny red-faced girl in clean linen. "Strong and whole." Martha collapsed back onto the sweat-soaked bedding, tears streaming down her face. Relief mingled with the knowledge that daughters brought no status to a family, only the eventual cost of a dowry. Yet as Agnes placed the squalling infant on her chest, Martha's arms instinctively cradled her daughter with fierce love. "You've done well," Agnes said quietly, now focused on delivering the afterbirth and checking for excessive bleeding, the silent killer that claimed so many new mothers. The neighboring women's prayers shifted to thanks, though their watchful eyes remained on Martha, knowing that the dangerous time was not yet past. Miles away from Martha's humble birthing chamber, Sister Catherine moved silently through the stone corridors of St. Anne's Abbey, her woolen habit brushing against the cold floor as she made her way to the infirmary. 6 years had passed since her father had presented her with an impossible choice: marry the aging merchant who offered a generous price for her hand, or enter the convent with a suitable donation to secure her position. At 16, faced with the prospect of becoming a fourth wife to a man known for his cruelty, Catherine had chosen the abbey walls. "Sister, the abbess requests more of your willow bark tincture for her joints," said Sister Margaret, intercepting Catherine before she reached the infirmary. Catherine nodded obediently, though inwardly she sighed. The abbess's demands always took precedence, even over the novice suffering from fever in the infirmary. "I shall prepare it immediately after tending to Sister Beatrice," she replied, her eyes downcast as required when addressing a senior nun. Sister Margaret's lips thinned with disapproval. "The abbess's needs come first. You would do well to remember your vow of obedience." Catherine felt the familiar constriction in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced in her father's house when her opinions were dismissed as worthless female prattle. She had exchanged one form of subjugation for another, trading a husband's authority for the rigid hierarchy of the convent. Yet as she changed direction toward the herb garden instead of the infirmary, Catherine acknowledged the small mercies of her chosen life: no childbirth pains to endure, no husband's fists to fear, and the precious gift of literacy that allowed her to lose herself in the manuscripts she was permitted to copy. The abbey bell tolled, calling the sisters to vespers. Catherine hurried to harvest the willow bark, knowing that missing prayers would result in penance, perhaps kneeling on dried peas until her knees bled, or additional fasting when her stomach already growled constantly from the meager convent diet. The strict religious authority that governed every moment of her day, from the pre-dawn matins to the evening compline, left little room for personal choice. Yet Catherine had found small spaces of freedom within her confined existence. In the scriptorium, her careful illuminations sometimes included tiny women's faces hidden in the decorative borders, a secret rebellion in plain sight. In the town square of Millfield, a very different scene unfolded as the market day crowd gathered to witness public justice. Margaret Cooper stood on the wooden platform, her face burning with shame beneath the scold's bridle. An iron cage fitted over her head with a metal piece that pressed painfully against her tongue. Her crime had been speaking sharply to her husband in public, questioning his decision to sell their best wool at what she considered too low a price. The merchant had complained to the town bailiff, and now Margaret endured her punishment as an example to other wives who might forget their proper place. "Let this be a lesson," announced the bailiff to the assembled crowd. "A woman's tongue must be governed by modesty and obedience to her husband's will." Children pointed and laughed at the spectacle, while men nodded approvingly. Most women kept their eyes averted, though a few cast sympathetic glances toward Margaret. Her husband, Thomas Cooper, stood at the front of the crowd, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and embarrassment, pleased to have his authority publicly reinforced, yet aware that his wife's humiliation reflected on his own ability to maintain proper order in his household. Margaret had been standing for 3 hours already, the metal bridle cutting into the corners of her mouth, her legs trembling with fatigue. Blood and saliva dribbled down her chin where the tongue piece had caused small wounds. Yet perhaps worse than the physical discomfort was the knowledge that her reputation was permanently stained. The gossip would follow her through the marketplace for years to come. "That's Margaret Cooper, the shrew who needed bridling." Her authority with apprentices in the wool shop would be undermined, her opinions dismissed more readily than before. As the town clock struck the hour, the bailiff finally approached to remove the bridle. "Has your lesson been learned, Goodwife Cooper?" he asked loudly enough for the crowd to hear. Margaret could only nod, her swollen tongue preventing speech. The ironic effectiveness of the punishment. Thomas stepped forward to take his wife's arm, his grip unnecessarily tight as he led her from the platform. "You'll hold your peace at home as well," he muttered for her ears alone, "or next time it will be the ducking stool." Margaret kept her eyes downcast, the perfect picture of wifely submission, while inside her mind raced with unspoken arguments and calculations. She would need to find subtler ways to influence the business decisions that affected her livelihood as much as her husband's, knowing that direct confrontation had proven too costly. The 3 women, Martha recovering from childbirth in her humble cottage, Sister Catherine hurrying to fulfill her religious obligations within Abbey walls, and Margaret Cooper, enduring public shame in the town square, experienced different manifestations of the same fundamental truth. A medieval woman's body and voice were not truly her own. They belonged to husbands, fathers, the church, or the community at large, each claiming the right to control, judge, and constrain according to rigid expectations of female behavior and purpose. The dawn of widowhood brought Matilda an unexpected gift: freedom. After 20 years of marriage to Thomas the blacksmith, his death from lung fever left her not only in mourning, but also in possession of something rare for a woman: independence. Standing in the doorway of the workshop that had been her husband's domain for 2 decades, Matilda ran her calloused fingers along the familiar wooden frame, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the lightening of constraint. "Master Willem, I've told you 3 times now. The horseshoes will be ready by Thursday next, not a day sooner," she said firmly to the town's most prosperous merchant, who towered over her with arms crossed. My journeyman is working as quickly as quality allows. Would you prefer rushed work that breaks beneath your horse's weight? Her voice carried the confidence of someone who had spent years observing her husband's craft, though she had never been permitted to strike the anvil herself while he lived. Willem's face reddened beneath his expensive cap. Thomas would have had them done by tomorrow, he muttered, clearly uncomfortable taking orders from a woman. Perhaps I should speak with your journeyman directly. Behind him, several other customers nodded in agreement, their expressions betraying their discomfort with a woman managing such important work. Matilda straightened her back, her widow's cap sitting squarely on her graying hair. My husband may have promised impossible deadlines to please you, Master Willem, but I run this shop now, and I won't have Edward working through the night and risking mistakes. The guild has recognized my right to maintain this business until my son comes of age, and I intend to preserve its reputation for quality. She did not mention the countless nights she had spent learning the account books by candlelight while Thomas slept, preparing for a day she knew would eventually come. Across the village, in a small thatched cottage set apart from the main road, the air hung heavy with the sweet, yeasty aroma of fermenting grain. Sisters Elise and Joanna bent over a large wooden vat, their sleeves rolled up past their elbows as they stirred the bubbling mixture with long wooden paddles. More honey, Elise murmured, wiping sweat from her brow with her forearm. The last batch was too bitter for the harvest festival, and the bailiff complained. Joanna nodded, reaching for a small, precious pot of honey they had traded for with 3 gallons of their spring ale. Father would never have thought we could support ourselves this way, she said with quiet pride, carefully measuring the golden liquid into their brew. Remember how he insisted we would starve without husbands? The sisters had remained unwed. Elise, after her betrothed, died in a hunting accident, and Joanna by choice, claiming devotion to caring for their aging parents. When both parents passed within a winter of each other, the sisters faced the prospect of destitution or dependence on distant male relatives. Instead, they had turned to brewing, a skill their mother had taught them in childhood, gradually building a reputation for the finest ale in 3 parishes. Master Thomas at the inn asked if we could provide 10 gallons for the Michaelmas feast, Elise said, her voice low despite their privacy. But he wants us to deliver after dark and use the back entrance. His wife doesn't approve of buying from women brewers. She sighed, accustomed to such arrangements. Though brewing had traditionally been women's work, as it became profitable, men increasingly claimed the trade for themselves, with many guilds now restricting female membership. Joanna's lips pressed into a thin line. We'll take his coin regardless. Did you hear that the new tax collector questioned our right to sell at market without a male relative's permission? I showed him Father's old brewing license, and he couldn't read well enough to see it expired 3 years ago. The sisters exchanged knowing smiles, their small deception another necessary adaptation in a world that sought to limit their independence at every turn. As dusk settled over the village, 7 women of varying ages made their way separately toward the small cottage of Widow Agnes, the midwife. They arrived one by one, carrying small bundles or baskets that might contain anything from herbs to bread, their movements casual yet purposeful. Inside Agnes's humble home, the women arranged themselves on stools and benches around the central hearth, where a small fire provided both warmth and light. The priest's new assistant questioned why I was gathering red clover by the north field, said Marjorie, a woman in her 30s with a reputation for successful poultices. I told him it was for my cow's feed, though we all know its true worth for women's monthly troubles. Murmurs of understanding rippled through the gathering. Agnes, her face deeply lined from decades of attending births and deaths, nodded sagely. Knowledge is safest when hidden in plain sight. Remember young Emma, who was accused of witchcraft last spring in the next village? Her only crime was speaking too openly about her skill with feverfew. The women exchanged solemn glances, each recalling how Emma had narrowly escaped serious punishment only because the Lord's wife had once benefited from her remedies. One by one, they shared information: which plants were flowering early, which combinations had eased Goodwife Turner's difficult labor, how to disguise bitter medicines in honey cakes for children. They passed small bundles of dried herbs between them, along with whispered instructions. A young woman named Bess, attending for the first time, watched wide-eyed as Agnes carefully unwrapped a small leather-bound book from a hidden compartment beneath her floorboards. "My grandmother began this," Agnes explained, showing pages covered with careful drawings of plants and cryptic notations. "My mother added to it, as have I. One day, another woman will continue our work." The book contained generations of feminine wisdom, remedies for everything from toothaches to preventing unwanted pregnancies, knowledge that would be dangerous in the wrong hands, yet vital to women's survival. As the night deepened, they spoke of other matters too, which men in the village raised their hands to their wives, which girls Markbaus might need protection or guidance, how to support widow Mathilda against the guild members who sought to undermine her authority. In this small, fire-lit room, they created a space where women's concerns and knowledge took center stage, a rare pocket of solidarity in a world that demanded their submission. "Remember," Agnes said as they prepared to leave, departing individually, as they had arrived, "our strength lies not in confrontation, but in persistence. Like water wearing away stone, we find the paths between obstacles." The women nodded, gathering their belongings and slipping back into the night, each carrying a piece of collective wisdom to sustain them through the challenges ahead.